In today's American English pronunciation lesson, we're talking about phase 1 of building the mouth posture of American English so that you can sound like a native. We're going to be covering the jaw, which is extremely important, as well as the schwa itself, getting that nice clear center of gravity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the breath and a little with the lips, because this will also be important. Hi, I'm Josh, your American English guide, and this is English Hacks Pronunciation, where I help you to sound more like a native if you want, and to understand real, natural speech better. So the first part that we're going to focus on is the jaw. And as we talked about before, this is super important, because if your jaw isn't open enough, nothing else really matters. So the first exercise we're going to do is to set your jaw in a more open place. And luckily, there's a relatively easy way to do this. You're going to put your hands here on the sides of your jaw where the muscle is. If you close your teeth together and you tense, right? You try to sort of bite down. Right, you see my hands moving out. That muscle is tensing. If I just have my mouth closed and I don't try to tense or bite, there's no tension there. And that would be 0% open. So then in your language, you're going to be open a little bit. Right? And this should be roughly about 25% or so if your language holds the jaw more closed. So if you open just a little bit, and you're used to talking maybe from around here, okay, your jaw is a little more closed, you probably won't feel any tension here still. Okay, just because your jaw is a little more open doesn't necessarily mean we feel a lot of tension in the muscles. And especially because it's your native language, it's going to feel relaxed, right? Now here's the trick. If you open to about 50%, about halfway, okay, so we're closed, 25, 50, okay, and I'm talking from here, okay, this is nice. This is what we want for American English. It's about 50% open. The interesting thing that you'll notice is that if you don't open too much, there's still not a lot of tension here. So you can use this as a guide to say that, okay, when you start feeling more tension, you open your mouth to a certain point, right around here, and you're going to start to feel those muscles tense and push out a little. That's too far. You don't want to go that far. Once you start feeling those muscles tense, which might be around 60 to 70% open or so, then you want to pull back a little bit. You don't want to just go to the line where you don't feel the tension. You want to pull back a little tiny bit, close just a little bit more. We're going to talk about why in a second. And remember, we're talking about the flow of normal speech. If we use the fully enunciated versions of the more open sounds like ah, o, ow, I, then what's going to happen is we will open a little more and you'll start feeling that tension. We want to focus on this normal range where there's really not any tension in here, so you can practice holding your jaw there. And then when you work in the more fully enunciated versions, you can get used to opening a little bit more. We're going to ignore the fully enunciated versions for now. We'll explore that more when we talk about the vowel masterclass. Now, the test or checkpoint that you're looking for with setting the jaw is if you sound more open and clearer. That's it. We don't care about the exact sounds. Do you sound more open? Do you sound clearer? So that's how you find the right openness for your jaw. Now, before we talk about the exercises to practice reinforcing that openness, there are 4 common traps, and you will probably fall into at least 3 of them as you practice. Okay, everybody that I've worked with so far has fallen into these traps or made these mistakes, we could say. The first big trap or common mistake is thinking that you're opening enough when you're not. That's why you want to open enough to start feeling the tension and then close back up a little, because it's very common that you'll just go from, say, here in your native language to here. And that's not enough. We want a little bit more than that. And one way that you can tell if you're opening enough, since you're not really going to feel the tension here, is if you start to sound a little more open and clear. Because if you try to speak like this, right, even if all your sounds are pretty good, it just doesn't sound as clear. It sounds kind of closed. But as soon as you open up a little bit more, you're going to start hearing more resonance and things are going to start coming through better. Common trap or mistake number 2 is the opposite. It's opening too much. And this is, again, where the feeling this tension really comes in handy, because if you start feeling that tension coming in to the sides here, you know that you're open too much. So that's a pretty easy thing to fix. The third common mistake is that you will go, let's say you open, you find that 50%, and then you start trying to speak, you start trying to do one of the exercises that we're going to talk about. Look in the mirror if you have to, because you might not feel it at first. If you pay close attention, you'll notice that maybe you start here. So the sentence, I want to go to the beach. And you say, I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. Because your brain wants to close your jaw back to where it was. As soon as you start focusing on a sentence or whatever it is, your brain is going to say, oh, I need to go back here. You want to avoid that. Something else that can happen with this mistake is, let's say you open up to 50%, you start good, and then you're trying to hold it there, but you keep going back to yours and then back to English and then back to yours and then back to English, and you end up doing this. I want to go to the beach. Okay, it's a very common thing to happen. Don't do that. We don't want that much movement. Okay, a little bit of movement is normal, but there's actually not a lot of motion from the jaw itself. The chin can move a bit, the cheeks can move a bit, might create the illusion that the jaw is moving more. It's not moving very much in the flow of normal speech. And the last really big trap or mistake that you want to avoid is tensing the jaw to try to hold it in place. After you notice that maybe, okay, you try to open here, it's good, you start practicing and it closes up, you might consciously or not consciously, on accident, you might try to tense your jaw to hold it there at the 50% mark. But if you do that, everything starts sounding really tight and really tense, and you don't want that. Speaking of practice, how do you practice this? Let's talk about the exercise to reinforce your jaw once you find it. And you're going to want to focus on these traps that we talked about as you practice. So pay very close attention to exactly what your jaw is doing. We're using that tension as a guide to set it. Okay, we know where that is. And then you can put your hands here. My thumbs are under here, grabbing here. And this will help you see how much your hands are moving. You just want a little bit of movement. That's okay. Now, what you can also do to make sure that you're not getting too much tension, you're not opening too much or whatever, you can actually do maybe more like this. So we're going to go ahead and walk through some examples here so that you can see me. I can guide you along, but you can use any sentence you want. You can make your own sentences. It doesn't matter. And the very first thing that you're always going to do until this becomes automatic, it doesn't matter if you're on the jaw, if you're talking about something later, we're working on phase 2, phase 3, you're always going to want to go make sure your jaw is set first. That's always the first step. Now, your sounds don't have to be perfect. We don't care about the sounds right now. And one really, really great thing to do here is to slow it down, because that gives your brain more time and resources to actually feel what's going on and to be able to adjust better. So let's do this slowly. So the first sentence we're going to use is, I want to go to the beach. 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 And from there, you can speed it back up. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. Take your time. Let's do another example. We'll start slow, and then we'll go to the fast one. Do you see that man? 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 Make sure you don't say like this. Do you see that man? Do you see that man? Or don't do this. Do you see that man? Do you see that man? Okay, pay close attention. From there, you can go on and find or create your own examples. The next exercise you're going to want to do once you start getting that basic feeling and familiarity with the simple sentences is you're going to want to start working in some timed talking practice. And again, the sounds do not matter. You're just talking to yourself. Don't worry about talking to other people. That's not what we want here. You're going to set a timer for 1 minute. That's it, just 1 minute. And what you're going to do is you're going to talk and you're going to try to hold your jaw in the right place. You're going to practice that. It's going to be part of your regular practice. And once that starts to become more normal, you're doing pretty good. You want to extend that to a total of 2 minutes and then 3 minutes. You don't have to go past 3 minutes. When you are practicing setting your jaw, meaning finding that openness, and when you're practicing holding it there, at first you want to use some sort of visual feedback. So that could be a mirror, that can be a camera, whether you record yourself or not. And you're really focused on feeling, but also seeing and looking at what your jaw is doing. Make sure it's not bouncing, right? Because you're probably not going to notice these things or feel these things. You need this visual feedback to correct yourself. But that can become a crutch, meaning something that you'll have to lean on. And then if you don't see your mouth, it might go back to where it was. So when you're first practicing these things, use a mirror or a camera. And then as you progress, as you're practicing, as you're starting to get more familiar with it, you want to start removing the visual. You still want to record yourself on video, but you want to start practicing where, like, okay, maybe you look into the camera and, you know, you say a sentence or whatever it is, you're looking at your jaw, okay? And then you have a second step where you don't look at the camera, but you're still recording, and you try to do the same thing and see what your jaw does, okay? Then as that starts to become pretty good, you want to still record yourself, but don't look at all. Now the test exercise or checkpoint for if you are holding your jaw in place, can you hold your jaw in place without falling into any of the traps while talking for 3 minutes and not looking at your jaw? Now, before we move on from the jaw, let's talk about the routines. The first thing is that all the previous work that you did, if you're still working a little bit on some of the 4 directions or whatever from the previous one, that's okay. You still want to give a little bit of attention to the ones that are difficult, like if going down with the back is extra difficult, keep practicing it. But a lot of that phase 0 stuff, it's going to become your warm-up. You're not going to stop doing it. You're just going to spend less time. So you should be spending about 5-10 minutes at the most for your warm-up right now. That's all the phase 0 stuff. The new material is going to take most of the rest of the time. So for the jaw, I want you to be practicing this for at least 15 minutes a day. Let's go ahead and talk very quickly about the lips a little bit, because you are going to want to be aware of this for the schwa. When your jaw is more closed, your lips, especially the corners of your lips here, are probably going to be tighter. Maybe they're not, or even if your mouth is more open in your language, maybe it's like American English, the sides of your lips still might have a different tension. So all we're going to do is open your jaw first. It's always step 1. So set it first to about 50%. And then try to feel your lips. Go back to your jaw openness in your native language. and then go back to American English. And just pay attention to the tension here. If you feel any tension, you want to try to get rid of any tension. Okay? It doesn't matter if that is the correct attention for American English or not. You're trying to remove all tension. In addition to this, I will direct you again to Idahos'a's video, A Guided Meditation for Your Mouth, because he does a really fantastic job of introducing some basic things, especially with feeling the lips. You can go watch that after this lesson. It's linked in the description. Don't worry too much about the lips right now. You just want some basic awareness and feeling. It's going to become much more important in phase 2 when we talk about the vowel masterclass. For the schwa, you want to make sure that you don't have any extra tension there. Just make sure your lips aren't pushing forward. It's not like or something like that. That's why we want to spend a little bit of time here before the schwa. Your routine for the lips is you're just going to spend, say, 2 or 3 minutes. Before we talk about the schwa, there's one more big thing we need to go over, which is the breath. I know you want to get to the schwa. Just stay with me here. This is really important. There's more techniques and exercises I want to give you guys for the breath so that you can master this. And the reason why this is important, and we have to talk about this first, is because the breath is part of the sound. Even if everything else is perfect, let's say I do but I don't have enough breath, or it's too controlled. Number one, it's harder to understand, to hear clearly. Number two, it's like, is that the right sound? It almost sounds like maybe it's not the right sound, but I know it's the right sound because I know how to make it. I'm just not using enough breath. So let's go over some more techniques here so you can start mastering that breath more. There are 2 parts to the breath in a language. The first part is control, meaning, how tight, how closed you are, how open you are to let that air come out of the throat. But number 2, which is also very important and a little more difficult to get, is the force of breath. If I try to just open a little bit so you can hear this nice and easily, and you can practice with this. Let's say I take a deep breath, I hold it, I start closed, and then let's say I just try to use a little bit of force. I just try to push a little bit. Basically, I'm just kind of letting it come out. So I go, say I can continue doing that for a while because number 1, I'm only letting a little air through, and number 2, I'm not pushing much, so the air is going to slowly leave my lungs, very, very slowly. Now, I could be completely open and not push out much, and that would be like, I didn't let it all fall out, I just kind of didn't have a lot of force there. Now, on the opposite end, let's say I'm open a lot, and I really try to push the air out really strongly. So it's a different effect. Now, if we go back to the closed position, so I just open a little bit, but I try to push out really strong. Now, it was a lot shorter. The breath left faster, even though I still had that tighter control. So there's the control for how much the breath is coming through, but then there's also the force that also affects how fast that breath gets pushed through that opening. It's probably one of the biggest breath exercises that is going to help you. The breath in 4 levels. Now, at first, this might seem kind of weird, but trust me, there's a purpose for each level. The first level you're going to do is basically a strong whisper, very strong, forceful breath, no voice. You're going to just pick a random sentence. It doesn't matter. Let's just use, I want to go to the beach, because that's what we usually do. And you just say that very strongly. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. So you can hear, it's like I'm whispering, but I'm trying to push it out with more force. But one big trap here is you might think you're pushing out enough, and you're probably not. So if you're doing like, I want to go to the beach, it's not enough. I want to hear more. I want to. right? Think of breathing. I want to go to the beach. That's what you want to do. Try to make it as strong as you can. Another trap is that maybe you're pushing more, but you're too tight, you're too controlled. Okay, this goes back to that throat control. So maybe you say like, I want to go to the beach. Okay, that force is there, but it feels very tight. So you got to open up a little more. So this separates the breath from the voice, and it also helps you try to push farther than you think you have to, because a common mistake is that you don't go far enough. And it just gives you a better idea of, okay, this is what strong breath would be. Then the next level, we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to add voice. So we want to hear a lot of that air mixed in. This is normally not what you want in American English, but there's a purpose for this level, don't worry. So instead of, I want to go to the beach, add a little voice. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. This helps you start to bring in the voice, and then you start to figure out how to balance the two, which might seem very obvious and simple, but that actually is a problem for a lot of people. And it makes a lot more sense when you're trying to work on the breath to remove the voice from the equation first, get that breath going, and then start adding that voice back in. It makes the process a lot simpler. And then you're trying to find that balance to intentionally make it breathy, because if you can intentionally make it breathy, where it just sounds like there's voice but there's too much breath, then you can better intentionally not make it breathy and control that level of breath better. You see what we're getting at? Okay, the next level is just a normal whisper. So we don't want to be too strong, we don't want to be too weak, but this is not a normal whisper in your language, because if your language uses less breath, or it uses more control so that breath doesn't come out as much, your whisper is going to be a little bit lower, a little bit smaller. We want a normal American English whisper where there's nice good flow, there's a constant flow of breath. So you don't want to say, I want to go to the beach. No, you want to kind of fall forward into the next word, into the next sound. Let that breath keep going. I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the beach. See, it doesn't stop. I want to go to the beach. And it's not just about not creating pauses. It's about keeping the airflow consistent. Because one problem you might have is maybe you kind of start pushing out some breath and then it goes back to where it was before because you're not used to it. Okay? So you don't want to say, I want to go to the beach. Or, I want to go to the beach. Okay? You need to be able to control a consistent level of basic airflow to make a nice, good flowing whisper. The last step, we're going to add that voice back in again, but because we don't have extra breath, it's just going to be normal American English speech with the proper level of breath. I want to go to the beach. Okay, this is probably going to be the trickiest one. I want to go to the beach. As I talked about probably before, it's a little harder to hear that breath now. I want to go to the beach. Right? That's all breath because there's no voice, but that breath is still underneath the voice. Okay, and it's helping us fall forward through the sentence. I want to go to the beach. Not, I want to go to the beach. That's good for practicing that other level. That's not what we want normally, and that's not what we want for this level. Also, you don't want to do, I want to go to the beach. Try to get enough air, consistent flow, not too constricted. Now, the other techniques we're going to talk about are going to help you do that even better, but this is sort of the big main breath technique that you're going to want to keep practicing. I recommend that you do this at least 5 to 10 minutes every day. Random sentences, change it up every day. This is its own little routine. Now, one other thing that can really help, especially if you're having trouble maybe with your throat being a little too tight or a little too closed, you're still having trouble getting that breath to flow really well. Remember in phase 0, we talked about that technique where you take a breath, you hold it, it's closed, you open it a little, close it again, open a little, close it again. And we're focused on kind of feeling the throat, just getting a little bit of basic breath going to get familiar with it. You can take that technique and change it a little bit, and this will help you smooth things out and get a better transition from fully closed to fully open. You can also go backwards if you want. For example, see, it's nice and smooth. What I did not do is see how it's sort of like close, open, close. It doesn't, I'm generally opening, but I'm kind of like, I don't have this consistent smooth transition. If you have that control, it's going to be easier to do things here. But for the force part, there's a hack. This is the projection hack. So if you're on a stage, right, and you're giving a speech, what do? Well, you tend to push out your voice more so that you can be heard. There's more breath, there's more volume. You tend to enunciate more. Now what you want to do, we don't want to enunciate more. This is just the breath. Don't increase your volume. You're going to go to your native language. Go ahead and say the sentence, I want to go to the beach, in your language. Just first say it normally. Okay, your jaw is normal, your tongue is normal, your breath is normal. Just say the sentence how you normally would. And please go ahead and do this. Okay, say it a couple times, just kind of feel. Okay, now what I want you to do is go ahead and say that sentence again in your native language. You're going to keep everything the same, except you're going to project your breath a little bit. Don't increase the volume, don't enunciate more clearly. Just use a little more breath that you would use if you were projecting, and say that sentence exactly the same as you did in your native language. Go ahead and do it a few times. Now what you should notice is there's a little bit more breath coming through. And again, this isn't the same for every single language. So if your language isn't more closed off here, you're going to want to play with it and see. You might not even have to change anything here. But if your native language is more closed, usually you're not going to have enough breath. So your native language breath in normal speech is probably about here, for example. Okay? Let's say this is 0, you're like right here. Okay. Then when you project your breath, you probably bump up to maybe about here. Okay. Now this would more or less be normal American English level of breath. Then when we project, we might push our breath up here. Might sound a little unnatural in your language. That's okay. We don't care about your language right now. That will get you probably pretty close to what you want to do in normal speech for American English. And then you can practice that. Now you have a reference and an anchor based on your language to try to adjust into just that little extra force of breath that we need for American English. So I've given you some tools and exercises for the breath, and the test exercise or checkpoint so that you can kind of tell if you're doing better, if your breath is good enough, is do you sound clearer without being breathy and without raising your volume? So you want to play with the different exercises that we use, with the amount of force, with the amount of control, until you start sounding a lot clearer. That's your goal. Use the breath to sound clearer and let the sounds flow out on that breath. Your routine for the breath, you're going to spend 15 minutes practicing these extra breath exercises. And note that that 4-level exercise is its own little mini routine. So the work that you do for the exercises with the breath in your breath routine, that's in addition to the 4-level 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, so that's going to add to your total breath work time. Let's go ahead and jump into the schwa now. So the first thing I have to mention is, remember that, as I've talked about in other videos, when I talk about the schwa, this is actually a range for one sound. For those who don't know, really quick, there's the true reduced quick small little schwa, which is that's it. Then there is the nice, good, clearly enunciated true schwa, which would be more like and that's the center of gravity. That's what everything is built around in American English. And then there's that upside down V sound, or something kind of like that. When we're talking specifically about the schwa for the center of gravity, we're talking about that nice, good, clear not the upside down V, not the little okay? So now that we're on the same page with that, how do we make this? Now, if you practice the exercises from phase 0 and you started to master the different parts of your tongue, then you are right in the right place, because this is where it's going to start to become very useful, especially the back and the middle. The very first thing that we want to do here before anything else is set the jaw. We just talked about the jaw. Always set the jaw first to make sure that you're in place, because if you're not open enough and you say it immediately doesn't sound good. And note that we no longer want the brace. The brace was for the phase 0 exercises with the 3 parts of the tongue. We're removing that, no more brace. What we want to do is, for the schwa, we're going to go first into that dead tongue position that we learned last time. Okay, very relaxed, not really any tension. Throat is also relaxed. Now, if this doesn't work for you, it's fine. But we go into that dead tongue, and we know with the dead tongue, the jaw is a little bit more closed, right? It's not open enough to where we need it for American English. But what happens if you do that dead tongue and you open your jaw to where it needs to be about for American English? That is like 60 to 70% of the schwa sound right there. It's not 100% perfect. It's definitely a schwa sound. It's not fully deep. It's not completely deep enough to be right? It's a little deeper sounding. So that gives you most of the sound. Okay, now there's no guarantee, because there still might be something weird with the back of your tongue, like maybe as you open your jaw, the back of your tongue gets engaged and causes something different and weird. This is another opportunity to practice controlling that back. But if you keep that dead tongue and you just open the jaw, you're going to get really close to the schwa. From there, you can take that idea of like a ball or a bean or something, and your jaw's more open. Okay, you're pretty much dead tongue, but jaw more open. Take that ball or bean or however you want to imagine it, and you're going to sort of just set it not straight down and not back, but mostly down a little back, a little bit diagonal, okay, to where it's kind of trying to sit almost up against the back of the tongue a little bit. And it's a little light dip. Okay, so if I dead tongue, open my jaw, and then put a little bit of pressure there. That's a pretty good sounding schwa sound. Very nice and deep and clear. I've also talked about this as sort of like a bowl shape where you lift the front of your tongue. It doesn't really matter what the front of your tongue is doing very much. I've talked about this in other lessons. I'm not going to go into every possible way to make it here, but that's the basic idea. Now, the ball shape is also an important concept, not just for the schwa, but because if you imagine there's a ball in your mouth, that helps us keep space. Okay, remember the jaw is open to a certain amount, probably more than your language, maybe not, but it's open a certain amount. That's space in the mouth, creates space. Then when we have that center of gravity where the tongue is down a bit more and in the center, that also helps create space. So if you imagine a ball in the middle of your mouth, that helps you sort of remember and actually kind of feel, oh yeah, there's all this space in my mouth, right? It's taking up that space. Now don't let that push the back of your tongue down, right? Because the ball just kind of sits in the middle. But that can help you visualize what you're trying to do when you're getting that perfect center of gravity mouth posture. Now there are a couple common traps that are going to give you a lot of trouble. And even if you watch my previous videos about the schwa, this is new information here. So this will probably help you if you still have trouble. Now, the first big problem is the back of the tongue. This causes problems for pretty much everybody that I've worked with, and pretty much everybody I've worked with has the tongue pushed forward a little bit. So that's probably why. If your language doesn't push the tongue forward, you might not have this problem, or you might not have it in the same way. But remember, we don't want that tongue pushed forward in American English. If you do that, you're probably going to get something like uh, sounds kind of like a schwa, but it's not quite, at least not for American English. See how that sounds more open? So just by pushing the back of my tongue forward a little bit while still trying to keep that same basic shape and tension, it's completely changing the sound. So you want to make sure that the back of your tongue is not pushed forward, make sure that it's not pushed up, make sure there's not a bunch of extra tension in the back. Okay, it should just kind of sit there. The other big problem that people run into is when they start to get that back under control, they don't really know what to do anymore with the middle. And this is, again, why we practice the 3 parts of the tongue in the 4 directions in phase 0. Continue to practice that if you have to. But that next big trap is where you flatten out the schwa too much. And maybe it'll sound really good as like a quick reduced sound. That commonly happens, but that's not the center of gravity that we're going for. So if you're in that position, that's good. But then you want to go from there, get that middle of the tongue down a bit, okay, like you're placing that ball on it without the back getting out of place. So you're basically trying to say, but more open and clearer, right? So don't let that tongue flatten out in the middle. Now, a quick note about the breath specifically for the schwa. Make sure that you have a nice good airflow and that schwa kind of comes out on the air. You should be able to hear at the very end when that voice starts to disappear that there's a little trail of breath, just a tiny little trail. It's not like, no, it's a little too much. It's a tiny little bit at the end. That will tell you more or less that you're on track. But remember, the goal of the breath is to make the sound clear. Another common trap here is the throat. Okay, we talked about the throat before, how to do the 4 directions, how to try to become more aware of any tension that you have. But you might try to go into and maybe your throat is kind of pushed up a bit, or it's a little too tight, and you get, maybe your mouth is good, but you get something like it's going to be tension in here. Okay, and that can also add extra tension to the back, which can throw things off. So you might sound pretty good, but if you kind of notice, there's a little something extra in there, go to the throat, because that might be one of the problems. And also the lips specifically for the schwa, make sure, especially if you're a French speaker, make sure that you're not doing something like See, my tongue is pretty much in the right place, but just by changing the lips, it completely changes the sound. It's not even really recognizable as a schwa, at least not to my American ears. The lips are really, really important. For the schwa, the lips basically just sit there. They shouldn't be too tight. We talked a little bit about that. You got to play with getting them a little more relaxed if they're more tight in your language, but they should just be kind of just sitting there, okay? They don't move, they don't push out, they don't do anything. Now, the first exercise that we're going to do is kind of simple. It's actually more of like a preparation type of exercise. It builds on the 4 directions from before. What you can do is just sort of practice pushing this down a lot and then back up and use voice. So you can go like, and really go slow and try to hear what sounds closest to the schwa. That's pretty good. So you try to stop around that point, and then you can say, okay, if that doesn't sound perfect, or near perfect. Remember, it can sound schwa-like, but we want it to be an actual American English schwa. You can play with other parts. So you can say, okay, like, that sounds pretty good. Let me try to do something with my back. Maybe the back of my tongue is a little pushed forward or too tense. And so you, then maybe that sounds a little better. If it doesn't sound better, go back. If it does sound better, then keep that in mind when you practice. And this is how you further identify other problems, especially based on the traps we talked about, and make little micro adjustments or changes so that you can find that sound even better. The next exercise is perhaps a little bit more interesting and challenging, and that is for you to say the schwa, the clear center of gravity, 5 times in a row, perfectly or near perfectly, and then you say a random sentence. The first thing is, if you mess up, if you try to say and it does not come out close enough to perfect, right? It's not at least say 80 to 90% perfect, then you have to start over. Okay, so you might get whoops, gotta go back to 0. This is a deep learning technique that's going to help you a lot. Don't try to rush through it. Now, about the random sentence, I would recommend just writing a sentence. It doesn't matter. I want to go to the beach. And you just repeat that sentence every time. Okay, so 5 times, sentence, 5 times, sentence. And set a timer for about 30 seconds to a minute at first. And then maybe work your way up to, say, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And this is really going to help you get that built automatically. You can go back and use the first exercise to make the little changes. A good technique here, let's say you get and then you mess up, you make a mistake. Don't just go back and say okay. No, take a second there, feel what's going on, say, okay, what did I do wrong? What do I feel? What can I adjust to make it better? And then you try to make it better. Okay, okay, it's sounding better. Then you restart your 5. Okay, because now you're back in better position. The next exercise is sort of the opposite of that, and this is the big test. This will also be your checkpoint exercise so you know when you can move on to phase 2. What you want to do here is you're going to pick a topic. It doesn't matter what the topic is, you're going to pick a topic. I recommend that you record yourself for this. You're going to start talking about that. Okay, you're not going to think about the schwa. Don't prepare for it. Don't do anything. Just talk. It doesn't matter if your pronunciation is good or not when you're talking. That's not the point. Just talk, 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 talk. Now, preferably, you want to work with another person. It doesn't matter. They could be a friend who speaks your native language. It does not matter. They don't need to know English. If you don't have somebody to work with, you can set a timer for, say, 10 seconds, 15 seconds or so. If you're using a friend, they're going to randomly, clap or give you some signal. And when they clap or give you that signal, or when the timer goes off and it rings, you need to immediately, without thinking, try to do a perfect or near perfect Now, if it's good, you just go right back into talking. If you can't tell if it's good, you're going to need to work with a native speaker, unfortunately. If it is good, you're going to keep going. And you're going to try to do that a total of 10 times. You only have to get 7 right. If you can get 7 perfect or near perfect sounds, you pass. That's it, just 7. If you can't get 7, you get to 6, and all the rest are wrong, you don't pass. You can't go to phase 2. Now, if you make a mistake, right, you try to say, doesn't come out right, don't immediately start talking again. Just like before, take a second, figure out what went wrong, adjust it, make it sound better, then go back into talking. Your routine for the schwa is you're going to spend 20 minutes minimum every day doing these different exercises and trying to get that schwa nice and good. Now, like in the previous lesson, there are recordings in the link in the description for the schwa sound. And actually there's a recording. In that recording, you will hear me say the schwa sort of slow and long, like, and then you'll hear me say it more normally. Use this as a reference, practice with it, repeat after it, but don't just get caught in that. That's another little trap, little bonus trap here. If you just focus on listening and repeating, especially if it's just one sound over and over, you might get good at repeating it, but then when you go to do it yourself, you can't do it very well. Things like that can happen. It seems weird, but it can happen. So make sure that you're practicing the other exercises using this recording as a reference and not just repeating after it. And remember, all the elements, the jaw, the lips, the throat, the breath, the tongue, they all combine into this mouth posture. So as you're practicing, keep an eye on the throat, keep an eye on the breath, keep an eye on the jaw and the lips. Make sure that these pieces are in place as you're trying to get that because it could be maybe your jaw's a little too closed, maybe your throat is a little too high or too tight. That's okay. Remember, 90% of this is in the tongue, but these other little details in the vocal tract can have a big impact on the sound. It'll take a little bit of practice to incorporate all these elements, but just try to keep those things in mind if you're not getting the right sound. Now, your routine summary for phase 1. You're going to do your warm-up for 5 to 10 minutes and make sure that you have no major problems from phase 0. If you do, you should not be doing phase 1. Trust me, it's important. You're going to do the jaw for 15 minutes a day. You're going to do the lips for about 3 minutes a day. The 4 levels of the breath specifically, 5 to 10 minutes a day. The other breath work as needed, if you need it, for 10 to 15 minutes a day. And then the schwa for 20 minutes a day. Remember, these are all minimums, and that gives you a total of 58 to 73 minutes each day, which does seem like a lot, but this is what we need to build that center of gravity effectively. Do not move on to phase 2 until you can pass all of the checkpoints that we talked about today for the jaw, the breath, and the schwa. Thank you guys so much for watching another English Hacks lesson. Make sure to check out some other great English Hacks content, and I'll see you in the next one.